Okay.
Welcome, everyone.
Hello.
This is Phil Arnold.
It's Sandy Bigtree.
And welcome to Mother Earth's Pandemic, the Doctrine of Discovery. This is a very important topic, and we want to introduce you all to it now. But first, we have to thank you all for being so willing to donate, to support this effort to educate people about the Doctrine of Discovery.
It's been a really difficult time, and we're all kind of sequestered in our homes, but you've enabled us through your donations to get equipment to all the participants today, so they're able to set up and broadcast, and it's going to set it up for future conferences as well. So we thank you
very much.
Mm-hmm.
We want to start with this very important work of art from Brandon Lazor. It's almost prophetic because it shows a Haudenosaunee man with wampum belts. These are treaties between various people, various nations, and the Haudenosaunee. But he's wearing a respirator, much like we're all wearing these days during the pandemic. But you know, part of what he's revealing here is that broken treaties, which is the title of the piece, comes as a result of an extractive economy that's based in monetary wealth. And the symbols there are greed and self-serving worldview. So what he's depicting, unlike what we just heard from Tadadaho Sid Hill, where you have a thanksgiving, giving thanks for all the gifts of life, and an acknowledgement of that exchange that goes on daily between us all and the living world, Mother Earth.
And the treaties were, these wampum belts held those treaties as sacred. The belts are alive. They have a history that was founded at the lake when these nations were warring with one another. And it was through the use of wampum that the grief that each of these people felt that created the war in the first place was absolved through the use of wampum. So these are sacred wampum belts that really adhere to the truth and connect them to the knowledge that grief is just around the corner if you don't uphold your agreements with each other.
Right, and something else, that Sandy and I were responsible for the development of the Noñh-Great Law Peace Center at Onondaga Lake. And Onondaga Lake, as you just heard, is a sacred place for the Haudenosaunee. It's where the Great Law of Peace was founded over 1,000 years ago. And what we did was repurpose a Jesuit fort that had been built there in 1933, and for over 80 years celebrated that colonial history of the fort.
And I have to say, all the school children came through this fort, and they learned about the Jesuits coming to Christianize the Onondaga, which actually did not happen. It was a failed mission, and the Jesuits were only there for less than 20 months on Onondaga Lake, and they were coerced into leaving. And from that point forward, there has never been a Catholic church in Onondaga territory. So something went down that was memorable and did not want to be revisited by the Onondaga. When the fort opened the replica of the fort was built in 1933 during the rise of fascism in this country, leading up to World War II. And at the opening of this fort, they reenacted this event of a white man dressed up as Hiawatha. And it was the peacemaker who came across the lake in a canoe. But this celebration, they had a character dressed up as Hiawatha who came, ascended the steps, and turned over 600 square miles of land to the Jesuit priest, Father Lemoyne, in exchange to be Christianized. And that never happened.
This is a glaring example of the doctrine of Christian discovery, that essentially when Christians enter the lands of non-Christian people, those lands are automatically forfeit to the Christian nation.
So we need to change that narrative.
So the Haudenosaunee, in actual fact, are called, their Haudenosaunee is the word that they call themselves, meaning people of the Longhouse. They're better known by their colonized name of the Iroquois, or Six Nations Iroquois, which is actually a pejorative term given to them by the Jesuit Christians in the 17th century. They're originally formed from 5 and now 6 separate sovereign nations. And their influence, as this map portrays, extended from Nova Scotia to the Mississippi River Basin, from the Great Lakes all the way down to Georgia. So they had enormous influence. And today, they are known as the last sovereign nations who uphold their ancient pre-contact systems of government based in the Great Law of Peace, based in matrilineal society. Their value system is so powerful that it inspired the founding fathers of Western democracy in the 17th century, 18th century, and then in the 19th century inspired the founding mothers of the women's movement. And then they're also known for their contributions like lacrosse and other things.
I wanted to add that when the Jesuits renamed us as Haudenosaunee and called us Iroquois, they also Christianized each of our individual names, which were organized under this matrilineal clan system that Phil was just describing. And through the renaming of the Catholic Church, they reorganized us under the patriarchy of the father. So it completely restructured our families. And in so doing, it separated us from our clan mothers and our clan male representatives, Loyani, as a result.
At the Scano Center, we introduce people to the Haudenosaunee values. We think this is a good way to introduce people, not just to the history, not just to European contact, but to really introduce first, before we get to the genocidal actions of Europeans, we want to talk about what makes the Haudenosaunee special. Why? And this is very similar to other indigenous peoples around the world. The first of those principles is Scano, which is a welcoming greeting, meaning peace, wellness. And this can be obtained only through when human beings are in proper relationship with the natural world. Can they be at peace with one another? Then we talk about Thanksgiving address, the creation story, but the Thanksgiving address you just heard from Tadadaho.
The whole culture is organized around the development of the good mind. And only through this way of life and developing this good mind can we fully understand our proper relationship to the natural world. So all the ceremonies are around gratitude. Our so-called chiefs are called Loyani, which actually means men of the good mind. And in every aspect of a culture is reorienting and orienting to the earth.
So one of the things that we emphasize in the Scano Center is European contact, and with that comes the doctrine of discovery, which we'd like to explain to you now. Now, in Syracuse, New York, we have a particularly egregious depiction of Columbus in what's called Columbus Circle, right in the middle of Onondaga Nation territory, the central fire. And this, as you can see on the screen, is Columbus atop 4 disembodied Native American heads in the 4 directions. And it's very representative of what's the doctrine of discovery.
He is gazing west. The placement is so important here, what was happening. He's gazing west through the main Catholic cathedral in central New York. And at his back stands the courthouses of law. So he is backed by the law as he proceeds through the western direction of the country with looking through the church to enact this.
Really,
This is the church, yes.
Yeah, this is the church, and you can see a larger depiction. Did you want to talk about that?
Well, yeah, at the base, you'll see that this obelisk that he's standing on severs a canoe at the bottom. And as we mentioned, we opened the fort the year before, and the reenactment showed Hiawatha coming across the white stone canoe. This is a white stone canoe, and this was the following year after that major celebration in town. And they put the canoe in pieces, and it points north and south. And it's destroyed.
And you know, Columbus really is the poster child in America, particularly the United States, for the doctrine of discovery. And we want to outline that for you. So beginning in 1452, there's a succession of popes, Catholic popes in the Vatican, who write a series of proclamations or edicts to the church called Papal Bulls, describing how Christians, it is incumbent on Christians when they encounter non-Christian people that they take everything from them, they enslave them in the purpose for enlarging the church, Christendom. This first begins in Africa, then moves to the Americas, then around the world. It's the origin of the transatlantic slave trade, chattel slavery, and issues in the doctrine of discovery, or the age of discovery. So you can see how Christianity then is used as a weapon against indigenous peoples around the world. A few of these papal bulls from 1452 is Dum Diversas from Nicholas V. He says to the King of Portugal at the time that he is to invade, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens and pagans, to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery and take away all their possessions and property. So at this point, Portugal is raiding West Africa, and they're essentially being sanctioned by Vatican law to attack and pillage the African continent.
And their gold. They're
right.
Vast.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Vast gold holdings in West Africa at the time. And then in May 4th, 1493, 6 weeks after Columbus's return to Spain, Pope Alexander VI, this famous, infamous Borgia Pope, calls for the barbarous nations to be subjugated and brought to the Catholic faith and the Christian religion for the purpose of the propagation of the Christian empire.
And this Christian empire was based on the patriarchy and establishing a hierarchical society that was aligned to the church and the monarchs of Europe. And I want to say that during the same time, women, well, the matriarchy was being destroyed in the Americas through the church reorganizing us through the patriarchy. And this was happening at the same time in Europe around 1655. Women who were found collecting herbs and medicines were accused of witchcraft. And this is an etching from, it's a block print, right, from 1655. And it represents the massacre of the Waldenses. And the woman is supposedly said to be Anna, the daughter of Giovanni Charbonnier of La Torre.
But this really was also right in the middle, in the midst of this 15th century attack on indigenous peoples. So beginning on 5 December 1484 is the Summa Desiderantes, another papal bull that is issued by Innocent VIII against witchcraft. This results in the infamous Malleus Maleficarum of 1486 and really begins the witch trials that go on for nearly 300 years. So there's an assortment of assaults and oppressive actions that are happening in the 15th century that are launched on a global scale.
And talking about Columbus, I do want to just skip back to the Columbus Circle and just mention that it was erected in 1934 during the rise of fascism, and that the Italian community had hired a Florentine sculptor to create this statue, but they ran out of money and weren't sure they could get it shipped to Syracuse. So Mussolini chipped in and paid for the shipment of this statue. And in the process, he also had it enlarged and requested that it have inscripted Cristoforo Colombo, discoverer of America.
Fast forward to 1823, this kind of 500-year-old crazy religion talk morphs into federal Indian law and into property law in the United States with Johnson v. McIntosh. This is This is a very important case. Every first-year law student in his or her property law class learns about Johnson v. McIntosh. It's the basis of all title in the United States. So the doctrine of discovery is upheld as the way to extinguish Aboriginal title and really move land into private property. So 1823 is an important landmark in that. Continuing forward, as recently as 2005 in Sherrill v. Oneida, the US Supreme Court upholds the doctrine of discovery as a principle of law, as a principle of property. When the Oneida Nation wanted to buy land that would be taken off the tax rolls, the Supreme Court in 2005 decided that it would be too disruptive, and it would be too disruptive for the settler colonial people that are already there in that area. So what is the trauma of the doctrine of Christian discovery, and what is it? I mean, that's one of the fundamental questions that we've been trying to ask. Really, the doctrine of discovery unleashed this destructive worldview on non-Christian people as an extension of the Crusades. Indigenous peoples around the world, their bodies, their lands, their possessions were all to be used for the propagation of the Christian empire. So this is a kind of foundational principle of genocide, environmental destruction, devaluing, and violence against women, the origins of transatlantic slave trade, chattel slavery, and the destruction of Mother Earth. So it's not just a law, or a principle. It's more like a cosmology, a worldview, an engine of civilization. So when did it start? Has it ended? You know, you could say that it's foundational to the Roman Church. When the Roman Empire utilizes Christianity as a way of unifying this far-flung empire. Constantine is the emperor who is the first to convert to Christianity. And this very important book called Constantine's Sword by James Carroll, who's a former priest, investigates the relationship between the sword and violence. The sword is the cross. So beginning in the 4th century, you really can see the elements of this notion of oppression. Then it continues through the Crusades, this intolerance for Saracens or pagans or heathens, enemies of Christ, in the attempt to take the Holy Land, which is supposedly the Christian center of the world, from Muslim people. This sets the stage for Christian discovery on a global scale in the 15th century and continues through the Protestant age.
But through the process of this, the church had to disconnect people from their special relationship to the natural world. And that's where indigenous people find their identity, is that special relationship. And it's clear that that had to be severed because they attacked the women first. And the patriarchy was fundamental to that process.
So missionization, conquest, colonialism, these are all elements of the doctrine of Christian discovery. You could think of it as a grand universal theory or even a theology of oppression. It's a worldview, and we currently inhabit that worldview. This conference is dedicated to unpacking and realizing the extent of what that looks like. World domination is centered, informed by a kind of violence against the world. The dream of the Christian empire really flattens and eliminates diversity of religious expression. Yes?
And it morphs into some ideology of faith. When you're disconnected from the earth, and religion has to become a faith-based religion. Right.
So we can see it at play in destructive capitalism, right? Extractive capitalism, what we're currently part of today. world war, endless war, and aggression against others. And then, of course, climate change, which is really the most important feature. So the background of climate change and human destruction of the planet, it has a theology, it has a worldview that we can look at. Now, many of you, I know, have been involved with repudiations of the doctrine of doctrine of Christian discovery since 2009. So the last decade or so, more than a decade, we have almost all of the different Christian denominations interested in repudiating the doctrine of discovery, and we want to help with that effort. We want to put indigenous people in conversation with forward-thinking Christian people. But I also know that many of you are involved in trying to convince your own denominations of the importance of this topic, because so many Christians do not appreciate how this has negatively impacted not only the world around us, but their own spiritual religious traditions. And so that's an important element here. So finally, we want to suggest that we can move from what Canadian government is calling truth and reconciliation with respect to boarding schools and Indigenous peoples or First Nations peoples in Canada to a model more of like restorative justice and healing. That is to say, you cannot just focus on those who have been offended and ground down to nothing, but we also have to include the natural world in this healing process. We have to move away from these narratives of Columbus, the doctrine of discovery, colonialism, and this is a big effort going on everywhere. We need an indigenous story. Again, here in Onondaga territory, we feel that this has been a long neglected element of Western democracy that we need to celebrate and bring forward as a way, but bring it forward in a way that includes the land, that it, celebrates women and their role in the world.
Well, we literally get information from the land. There is a communication that's reciprocal, but we've lost that. I mean, our medicines come from the earth. These are all gifts. And the general spirit of life is enriching and perpetuating life. It's not about destruction. And we can join into that energy and be revitalized through reconnecting to the earth.
And we really need value change for our survival. It's not just a question of whether we want to adopt some elements of indigenous values who have been here for millennia, at least since the dawn of time. We need to move from an exploitative, extractive, oppressive system of monetary economy to a system of gratitude, of giving thanks, an economy of gifts exchange. So those are the sorts of values that we need to move towards for our own future and for the future of our children and our grandchildren. Finally, this image comes from Native America, episode 2 of PBS series that aired a couple years ago, that celebrates the origins of Western democracy here at Onondaga Lake. There's Tadadaho Sid Hill holding the original Hiawatha belt at Onondaga Lake. So again, welcome, have a good conference. We hope to be able to connect with you all, and take care.
And be well.